And we're delighted to be joined now by Dave Penman. He's the General Secretary of the FDA Union, First Division Association Union, basically the senior civil servants, the ones which I think Keir Starmer thinks are both fantastic but also flabby today. We'll come on to that, but I'd love to get your reaction to the breaking news in the last half hour or so from the Prime Minister, announced, interestingly, not in the House of Commons first, might not go down very well with the Speaker's Lindsay Hoyle, that he's going to abolish NHS England. That's the body that is basically the bureaucratic body in charge of the NHS services in England, clue in the name. How well is that going to go down in Whitehall?
I think we need to see what they're going to replace it with. I mean, what are they saying? Because NHS England's been set up to do a job in terms of running the NHS. They're talking about, abolishing it. So is that reform? Where are those controls and the people doing the jobs that are currently done in NHS England going to be? Is this simply about greater political control, because that was like kind of arm's length body, and what West Streeton wants is to
There's another layer of bureaucracy, because you've got Department of Health in Whitehall, and no one can really work out what it is they do. If you've got NHS England, who are actually running the NHS, and then you've got individual trusts and obviously the regional bodies.
And they're obviously managing relationships and resources and that with NHS England. So how is that then going to work? There's a challenge for ministers because they want direct control, but that also means they get direct responsibility for what happens.
Isn't there an element where, basically if someone waits, 26 hours on a trolley in A&E, the Health Secretary gets blamed for it anyway, so he may as well be in control of whether that happens or not.
And I think that's probably where the government have landed on this. So so that's fine to say that's abolished. What you're going to replace it with? How are you going to manage it?
Well, it's going to be the same people, isn't it? So you're going to make a load of people redundant. Everyone's going to get a nice big payoff, and then they're all going to be hired back as consultants or new staff and get another nice big six-figure salary. I mean, whoopity-doo-dah.
Yeah, well, whilst I wouldn't categorise it like that, I think there is a challenge like that. NHS has been
this will affect your members, won't it?
It will, and we also have members in NHS England as well. So I think...
Was Amanda Pritchard a member?
I don't say who is and isn't a member individually. So I think the NHS has been full of a lot of reorganisation, not just at the kind of central level, lower down as well, and that takes up a lot of energy and time and money. So I think understanding that's fine, you want to change and you want to cut, what you're going to replace it with is key, and that's not clear yet what is actually going to come with the abolition of NHS England.
As a trade union leader, are you quite surprised by what Keir Starmer and indeed Wes Streeting have been saying, not just about the NHS, but Keir Starmer in particular about the civil service? He's alternated his language because he's been very critical of civil service, and then in an article before his speech today in Yorkshire, he wrote an article today talking about how civil service are fantastic, but the system that doesn't work. He's always talking about them being the state is effectively, it's flabby, it's overcautious. He wants to basically try and get deregulation, basically getting it more efficient, using AI. I mean, good luck to him making £45 billion worth of savings with AI. I don't think we've ever had any technological IT project ever involved with the state which has ended up saving anyone money, I don't think. But, I mean, what is your reaction as a trade union leader to a Labour Prime Minister announcing this?
I think his language today was much better. I think
he said nice things about your members.
Well, it's not just that. I think I've criticised the Prime Minister on some of his language about civil servants, and also have to recognise when I think he's got it right. So what he talked about today about the problems with regulation, and he recognised that wasn't about the people who have been tasked to do that, because governments set up regulators, parliaments passed laws that just ask regulators to enforce, and you can't blame the civil servants who are doing the job they've been tasked with for why there's over-regulation. And I think the Prime Minister today made it a little clearer that actually what he's talking about is that system rather than the individuals, and some of the times his language has seemed to blame civil servants for actually what are systemic problems around government.
Well, I mean, there are systemic problems. There is a regulation problem. There is all that, but there is also an issue with the blob. And it was something that Tory ministers particularly complained about, civil servants complaining because someone asked them to get them a sandwich in the wrong tone of voice, and making complaints of bullying when people were asked simply to do the job they are paid by the taxpayer to do, supposedly servants to the state. There is a problem with the civil service, is there not? That it's basically got its own, certainly in Whitehall, its own political agenda, its own plans, and if all civil servants were, in Keir Starmer's words, fantastic, our country would be in a much better state, wouldn't it? Things would actually function and work properly.
But Julia, the reason why government doesn't work well at times, or when it does work well, the responsibility for that is complex and difficult. So if you look at government is not simply about the civil service in itself. It's also about what ministers ask it to do. So you take the last 10 years, we have had 6 Prime Ministers, 8 Chancellors, 40 different Finance Ministers, over 100 political changes in government, ministers spending months in departments rather than years. It's a bit like a football team where you keep changing the manager.
Yeah.
They keep bringing in new ideas and new initiatives, and it's really inefficient. Now, that doesn't mean that also the civil service can't reform or shouldn't reform or do things better, but the reasons why, if you genuinely want to fix government, you need to look at what the problems are, and those are complex. Rather than point the finger saying it's all ministers' fault or it's all the civil servants' fault, it's about saying what gets in the way of it. The language today, I think, was a lot better because the Prime Minister recognised that some of the reasons why we're in this place of the madness he talked about over-regulation, right, about the jumping spiders, whatever the examples that he wants to give, are about laws that have been passed and what governments have done in the past, rather than simply saying that's the problem of an individual civil servants and what they're doing. I think recognising that is a good step to start fixing it.
But it's not necessarily either or, it can be both, can it not? Would the civil service do a better job if it was largely in the office with people working together in the same building, be able to say, you know, hey Dave, I've had a problem with this, can I fix it? Oh, brilliant, lovely, great, that's sorted, lovely, jubbly, as opposed to organising a 45-minute Zoom meeting tomorrow after I've walked the dog and put the laundry on. The
reality of how civil servants work has changed completely. So one of the things the government are very keen on, and the last government was as well, about moving people out of London. That means
how'd that work out? When you move, for instance, you know, the Office of National Statistics to Newport, and was it 80% of senior staff didn't go, so they lost a load of massive skills and expertise.
But that's not what's happening now. They've moved 22,000 people out of London. This government wants to move further and faster on that. That means when you're a civil servant as part of a team, chances are that the rest of that team are not all just sitting in the same office. It's not that they're sitting at home. They could be in Glasgow, they could be in Manchester. The way people work is changing, and that means it also provides opportunities for people to work more flexibly. There's a balance to be struck between in the office and
there is, but fundamentally, if the people who
Julia,
pay your wages and the people who are accountable, the ministers, if they say we'd like you in the building, we'd like you to attend this meeting in person, and civil servants threaten to go out on strike because they're asked to turn up to the office 3 days a week, I mean, something's going wrong. At the end of the day, your employer gets to tell you where you work.
But Julia,
within reason.
That's only in a small number of places where that's happened. It's not us as a trade union that do that. And most civil servants recognise that there's a balance to be struck between being in the office and that. What's productive in the office and what makes no difference. What we don't want is civil servants who are told to come into the office, and when they sit in the office, they're sitting on Zoom calls the whole time. Because why? What is the point of doing that? So organising work well is a key element of it, but it also saves money. The government and the taxpayer have saved hundreds of millions of pounds in the Whitehall estate, and they're closing building after building.
Yeah, it's all very well. There's also, you lose efficiency, you lose training, you lose the ability of younger people coming through the system, communication, teamwork. We saw what happened when the Foreign Office people were working from home. People will have died in Afghanistan. People got trapped in Afghanistan,
Julia,
because Foreign Office workers, civil servants,
I spoke to a civil servant at the time who told me there was no difference between his access to information.
Of course they said
well, this is reality. This is someone who said that from home he can access the most confidential information that he can access in the office, that there was no difference. That's not the reason.
Was the rate of working.
That's not the reason why.
And the all hands on deck. And most of us in sort of jobs that have been in a situation where it's just a moment, like in our business here, there's breaking news, something's happening, all hands on deck. Teams who are working on other shows, like, right, literally, there's a terror attack, there's something happening. Right, everyone, you hit the phones there, you get your contacts. People working together. That is very different if people are working from home. And basically, we are in a non-stop crisis in this country in terms of our public
Julia,
services.
there are 500,000 civil servants. Not everyone's doing that type of work.
No,
some people are doing work that reflective. Some people are doing work. The HMRC did a study of looking at the efficiency of working from home versus working in the office. They could see no difference in terms of output around it, right? Because the nature of work is different. Some jobs will require you to be in the office 5 days a week, and there are other jobs that you can work flexibly. That's what we've got to get to, not arbitrary figures that are the same answer for 500,000 people doing very different jobs. It's interesting
that an awful lot of the top private companies in the world have now moved back from people working from home to getting people back in the office because of the communication, the team building,
some have,
the focus.
Some haven't.
The successful, the big ones have.
Well,
they're all moving back
HSBC
to it.
are moving from Canary Wharf back into the city. The last time I was here, I gave this example again, right, kind of stuff, because they've cut the floor space in half. Right, they're saving a fortune by moving to a smaller accommodation because they can see they can get the same delivery with less footprint. Now, this is a balance to be struck. we're not ideologues either way on it, right? So that's what we're saying. The new world of work is different for people. There's flexibility in there, and that also means at times they need to be in the office.
And will
civil
that,
servants
do you
recognise
think,
that as well.
will that involve AI? Now, the Prime Minister said today, you know, they're talking about AI can often do the job better. People should not, where their substantive work is something that could be done, you know, by a clever computer. You know, I mean, just things like, you know, opening envelopes for people applying for driving licences and things like that. We need to digitise the world. Is there a problem in the civil service that it is still basically kind of 20th century, not 21st century?
Well, it's interesting. I was on Newsnight last night with an AI specialist who talked about how her view in terms of digital government, her view would be that the UK government's probably something like third and fourth in the world. That what we did around gov.uk and how people access some of those public services have been quite innovative. I think there's a question about how you keep up that pace of change, that kind of digital by default that certainly Francis Maud was a big advocate for, that started a lot of this. How do you move that to the next level is the big challenge. And I think the question is, and I think that this has been my one concern, look, I think there's a real danger with this, that government overplays its hand. That, you know, you say, look, actually we can transform this where inevitably these things are going to take time and going to change. And it's different when it comes to public services. You know, if Sainsbury's get it wrong and introduce an AI tool and there isn't a can of beans on the shelf...
We've got a choice to go to Tesco.
Right, right. But that's not the same when it comes to public services. If you're dealing with benefits, if you're dealing with health services, you've got to think about what the consequences are, which means inevitably it moves slower.
Dave Perman, thank you very much indeed. Apologies for the coughing there. General Secretary of the FDA Union, really appreciate you coming.